Question number 4. Order. James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and reads, what estimates does he have of the cost to the Crown of repurchasing the New Zealand Superannuation Funds and ACC Funds shares in Kiwibank in 5 years' time?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, there is a number of incorrect assumptions in the question which I hope I can clarify. There is no automatic sale of the shares in 5 years' time by ACC or IRD or NZ Super Fund. At some point they can exit their investment if they wish, but they cannot do so within 5 years. If they do want to sell their shares after success in growing Kiwibank and increasing its value, then of course they should be appropriately rewarded for that. But we can't really predict at this stage how successful they will be in growing the value of the bank, nor at what stage they would feel that they wanted to sell the shares. It could be in the 2030s, 2040s, because that's how long those funds will be running.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So, when he said yesterday that once the 5-year limitation was released, if the ACC or Super Fund did want to sell their shares back to the government and that he would exercise that option, he made that commitment without any idea what the cost of that would be to the government.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, we have some idea in that we would, I suppose, assume that under competent commercial management, Kiwibank will be worth more than the valuation that's been put on it today, around the $500 million mark for 45%. But beyond that, the undertaking by the Crown is not conditional. I mean, we're absolutely clear. There is an RFR. They do have to offer them to the Crown, and this government would buy them, regardless of the price.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you. Has he seen other estimates that put the likely cost of repurchasing Kiwibank at up to $1.1 billion? And if he was in that position, would he buy back Kiwibank like he promised yesterday?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I hope the estimates turn out to underestimate the increase in value of the taxpayers' investment in Kiwibank. The faster it grows, the better for everybody. But in answer to the member's second question, yes. We said yesterday that if they're offered to this government, if we're the government in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, then we will buy them, and that remains the position today.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
What discount was applied to the valuation of Kiwibank when this proposal was made to sell a stake in it?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. It's actually quite an interesting question, because in the absence of putting Kiwibank out in the commercial market, we don't really know what its commercial value truly is. So we work with the valuation that was done by the board, commercial valuation a couple of years ago. The value that it's given now is less than that, but as we learnt from the electricity companies, it could be that neither of those valuations are what the market would be willing to pay. I personally suspect the market would be willing to pay quite a lot more. So the valuation for this transaction has been based on the earnings of the bank, what's happening with Australian bank share prices, and negotiation between the parties.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So just to be clear, is the Minister saying that the current $1.1 billion valuation does not represent Kiwibank's full market value?
The Honourable Bill English.
There would be only one way to find that out, which the member would find quite unacceptable, and that is to put it out in the market and see what they're willing to pay. That's the definition of a market value. But as I understand it, there's been previous valuations of Kiwibank at up to $1.5 billion, and this transaction has been carried out at the lower end of the valuation range.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So if the Super Fund or ACC want to sell their shares back to the government once the 5-year restriction has lifted, will the resale price of those shares be calculated on the same basis as the $1.1 billion valuation, or on the basis of book value, or on the basis of market value?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as we said, we can't really apply a market value because we don't know what that is, but we would hope for some consistency, I suppose, between how it's being valued now and how it would be valued in the future. Because ACC and New Zealand Super are driven by getting high returns, naturally enough they're negotiating to try and get the current transaction price low, and I imagine if they come to sell it and government is trying to exercise exercises its right to buy, then they will try and get as much as they possibly can so that they can look good as fund managers, and that's probably what's going to drive the process.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Has the Minister experienced any feelings of curiosity regarding what the market value might have been?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, none whatsoever. Not the slightest bit of curiosity.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Mr Speaker, why does he think that a future government should have to buy back at least $1 billion worth of shares as soon as 5 years from now, just so that he can have $300 to $350 million today?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government, with the nature of this transaction is that a government that wants to retain it in 100% ownership will have to do that. But secondly, it's the government paying itself. I mean, this is really a transfer within government. And in that sense, the value doesn't matter that much because we're doing business with ourselves, and any unders or overs are balanced out by the other side of the transaction. In the long run, what will matter most is that the bank is well run, that it has strong commercial drivers, that it satisfies its customers' needs. This deal is well aligned with those objectives, which will help the taxpayer and their investment and be good for the hundreds of thousands of customers of Kiwibank.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
What organisations independent of government, if any, provided advice on the valuation of Kiwibank that was in the announcement yesterday?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I can't answer that question in detail. It's been a product of negotiation between New Zealand Post, the Super Fund and ACC. I presume they had some sort of advice. But it comes down to the price that's acceptable to the parties. It's different than the process we went through with the electricity companies, where the value was set by market demand for the shares.
Question number 5.